Well, welcome to the Beyond Cinema studio at Tiff. We're with Leanne Pooley for Beyond the Edge in 3D. Is this your first foray into 3D?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What did that mean to you? How much did you enjoy that process, or was it technically a nightmare?
No, I mean, I was extraordinarily lucky. My DP, Richard Black, and my team, my stereographer, Sean, they'd all come from The Hobbit. So they'd been in 3D land for quite some considerable time, and they came straight from that to me. So really, I was able to just really focus on the storytelling, because 3D, 2D, digital film, whatever. If it's it's about the story, and those things are just a format.
Yeah.
But it was pretty great to have people who knew what they were doing and could guide me to make the most of what we were using.
So tackling the first ascent of Everest is obviously a massive task or massive challenge, and we met you a couple of years ago when you had the Top Twins here, and I think the slogan was like they were arguably New Zealand's most famous export other than lamb.
Yeah.
So where would what would Sir Edmund Hillary rank in that comparison?
It's interesting because the Hillary thing it's different depending on where you are around the world. I mean, in much of the world, Everest is the brand, if you like.
Right.
In New Zealand, Hillary is God. He's on the $5 note. That he is our Nelson Mandela, if you like. He is Everest, and he is probably the most significant New Zealander of the last century.
Yeah.
But in other parts of the world, I mean, I've met people since I've been here who didn't know who Ed Hillary was, but they know about Everest. So it sort of depends where you are.
Was that part of the reason for telling the story, or was it more as a with the Kiwi background,
wanting
to kind of tackle the biggest topic in the country?
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's the 60th anniversary, so that was an incentive. And it seemed kind of extraordinary to us in New Zealand that nobody had really done it. I knew that Ed and Tenzing got to the top. Sauntered up. I had no idea what they did. I didn't know there were 600 people with them. I didn't know it was this massive military machine, and that there was all this political pressure, that countries were sort of at war with each other to see who could get to the top of the mountain. All that sort of context. Didn't know any of that. I just knew they got there. So it seemed a good time to tell the story, and it seemed well, the more I read about it, the more fascinated I was by the story, and wanted to try and make it more than just a story about climbing a mountain. Yeah,
for me, I mean, obviously the legend of Sir Edmund Hillary loomed large, and for people who played Trivial Pursuit growing up, there was always who was the first to scale Everest. But for me, finding out that he was a beekeeper was a huge surprise. Trying to juxtapose that mentality and that lifestyle with this ascent of this amazing rock.
I mean, and that is the key. I mean, it has to be about a human being who we have some sort of connection with, and I really wanted the film to feel experiential, which was one of the reasons I chose to do it in 3D. I wanted the audience to feel like they were with Ed and Tenzing, and they were going on this journey together as best I could, and that they could identify with this guy who was an ordinary, humble guy who was self-conscious in lots of ways, completely useless with women, had all sorts of sort of insecurities and demons within himself, and he managed to achieve this extraordinary feat. And similarly, Tenzing, very humble.
What was the most surprising thing that you found out along your journey about them on a personal level?
With Sir Ed, I guess it was probably this interesting sort of juxtaposition of being a guy who was actually quite insecure in lots of ways, and also very, very ambitious. It was a sort of interesting balance within his personality. The New Zealanders tend to see Sir Ed as a very humble, self-effacing guy, which he was, but he was extraordinarily ambitious. Yeah. He wanted to get to the top of the mountain. He wanted to be the guy that got chosen to do it, and he wanted to prove himself. So in a way, that was that sort of strange dichotomy of his personality was probably the thing I learned.
What kind of relationship do the heirs have? Both Norbu Tenzing and Peter Hillary. Do they have other than having to comment on things that relate to Everest and kind of continue the brand, so to speak, what's their personal relationship?
They're friends, and they have a lot of connections to do with the work that's still going on in Nepal. I mean, Ed dedicated his life post this climb to serving the Sherpa. He's built, I should have these facts for you, he's built sort of 45 hospitals and schools and schools across Nepal, and he's spent his life. If you talk to people from that part of the world, they cry when you talk about Ed Hillary. I mean, I was thrilled that there were so many Nepalese people at the screening the other night.
Yeah.
And so the work that Ed started is being continued on by the family. So Peter and Norbu, who was here for the screening, work together a lot, know each other really well.
So like obviously at the end of the film there's a shout out to the organization, the Hillary Foundation, but in terms of today, I mean 1953, no one had scaled the highest peak on the planet. Today we've got, as we mentioned before we started rolling, we've got tours to base camps that are by people who are not necessarily even fit, and people jumping out of the stratosphere. What would be the bastard that Sir Edmund Hillary would knock off today?
That's a really interesting question, and that's one of the things I hope appeals about the film, is it is difficult to find heroes in a way today, because so many boxes have been ticked, so yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, they really had no idea if it could be done. They really didn't know when they got to the top of Everest, if they were going to have a brain hemorrhage, because their bodies couldn't physically cope with it. They didn't know for sure what was going to happen. So that whole psychological difference between doing it now and doing it then, the biggest difference, even I interviewed Jim Whittaker, who was the first American to summit Everest in 1963, 10 years later. He said to me that for him, knowing it had been done completely changed. He said it was really hard and painful and difficult, but he knew it could be done. Whereas when Ed and Tenzing were in that last 1,000 feet, they really didn't know it could be done, and that's the big change. So today, jumping out of the stratosphere is about as close as I can think, because you don't know for sure if you're going to survive, and that's the thing they had to face emotionally.
Mentally, is there anything for which you would risk death in that way?
Death? No. My children, I wouldn't. No. No, and I didn't go to Everest. I sent, we did all our shooting, and my cameraman who went to Everest and who summited for us, he had a 40-page book of storyboards, but he didn't have me, because I couldn't learn how to climb a mountain. And despite the fact that people think, everyone and their dogs climbed Everest, lots of people still die. Lots of people. And it's still a dangerous, extreme environment, despite the fact that every CEO thinks he can buy his way up. It's an extraordinary environment. So
yeah, I mean, the fact of them working in deprived circumstances, I think, is the key phrase in the film. It's you don't know what you're lacking until you get up there and know what you don't have that would have helped.
That's right.
For a filmmaker, I assume sometimes you have that feeling as well.
Yeah. Well, you always think you don't have what you need. When have you ever had a filmmaker sit here and go, oh yeah, we had too much time, too much money, too much gear? That never happens. So we're always complaining. But they had to try and work out, and there was a team behind them, and a lot of science had gone in. They'd done research, and they knew they had to drink a lot of water, for example, that you had to stay hydrated, because you get completely dehydrated up there. The moisture's sucked out of your body, and there'd been some science go into it, and that actually had a big impact on their success. So the other thing that I like about the story is, while it is the success of these two individuals overcoming their own demons and their own backgrounds to achieve this, it is about a team. It really is about a team that worked together to achieve something, none of which I think were particularly concerned with personal glory, which is kind of different from today. I don't think Ed had an ego and he wanted to get there, but he did want the team to succeed.
Yeah, there's definitely such an emphasis these days on buzzwords like crowdsourcing and crowdfunding now, but that was kind of the original crowdsourcing came out of wartime, when all these companies worked on building these tents or 30 different companies worked on making the elements of the shoe.
That's right,
That went
yeah.
into this climb, which is
And most of those guys, I don't think they were paid.
Yeah.
You know, they were there because they wanted to be part of it, and they got letters from all over the world. Climbers from everywhere wanted to be part of it, wanted to be on this expedition, wanted to try and make history. You know, they knew someone would get there. It was going to happen. The Swiss had got very close the year before. There was a sense that this was the time.
Yeah, and obviously last time you were here, Top Twins took the Audience Award, which is obviously huge and fantastic.
And a shock
so-
to all and sundry.
I
Yeah.
think there was a Michael Moore film or something that people expected to take home the top prize.
Yeah.
So congratulations on being back at Tiff with Beyond the Edge.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.